So thanks for having me come out.
Thanks for
This
coming.
is my first video in Petaluma, even though my son lives here in Petaluma. So who are you?
I'm James Martin with Threshold Corporation.
And what is Threshold? What do you guys do here?
Threshold Corporation is about making the home smart and looking in the future where you're starting to have cameras, surveillance systems, security, home automation, energy management, all these things, kind of connectivity functions in the home. And while some of those pieces are out there today, we're about trying to bring it together for the masses, a real do-it-yourself, go to the store, bring it home, and within literally a couple of minutes you're doing something relatively sophisticated that up to now you had to hire somebody who knew which pieces would work together and how.
Yeah, this has been the place for rich guys like Bill Gates to get his house automated, and he would contract out and somebody would do it and program it and then teach him, oh, you just hit,
You're right about that we had to solve not only ease of use or ease of setup, because one thing is people think about ease of use, but you're really talking about ease of setup. When I take it out of the box, what's that out of box experience? And how quickly can I get to something? Or do I have to call one of these services to come set it up, which is really, you're not really mass market unless it's truly do it yourself. And so we cover a broad range of applications, and it'll get larger as time goes by, but initially surveillance, security, home automation, those sort of things. So let's say you want to have a motion detector that detects when you drive up, let's say, and turns on a light because you live in a really dark place where there's no street lights or whatever, but you don't want the street light you don't want a light outside running all the time. Yeah. And because everybody's worried about energy conservation now. So before we just flick the light on or have something that just came on at dusk and stayed on. Well, now we want it more intelligent. We want that light to come on when I drove up. But the other side of it is I may want that motion detector after I've come home and, or let's say while I'm gone, to detect when somebody's come to the front door and trigger a camera and then have that camera record an image or send that image to me on my cell phone. So yeah. All these things people are wanting to be interactive with their home, but for the most part, it's a complex thing to get it out of the box and get it to doing that thing. They may not be that hard to operate once you got there. So Threshold was really about how do we make that, there's no speed bumps along the path of making the purchase decision and then doing something useful with it. So that's our spiel.
Now, let's say I want to do some of that stuff. I want to have a camera at the front door. I want to have motion sensors in at least the lower rooms, and and maybe some light control so I can turn on lights from the internet or from the motion detector or whatever. What do I need? It looks like I have a box here that's like a brains for the house.
Right, that's true. We call the home controller. Think of it as a router, firewall, wireless access point, but it's also the application server that runs all these various applications like energy management and security and surveillance, and they're all integrated together so you have one user interface. And that's the other thing is people like, you've seen it in cell phones, PDAs, people want things to merge together where once they master one user interface, they want that to control as many things as possible, have as few different places to go to. Sort of like component stereo. In the old days, everybody picked their tuner and their preamp and their power amp, and then you got the point where you had a group of customers that just said, I want a box, I want to come home, I'll plug it in, I want music. Yeah. And that's essentially where we're going at. We have one box that essentially covers all those kind of connectivity needs around the home. And you'll be able to purchase this in sort of instant gratification kits, say if you're more surveillance oriented, buy this. It'll come with a couple of cameras and motion detectors and so on that's kind of oriented that way.
Give me an idea of sort of what the price starts at for a modern house,
Well, let's give you an example of a surveillance instant gratification kit, which would be the controller, a couple of cameras, a couple of motion detectors, maybe a door window sensor. You're looking at sub $600, for that. So you can actually automate a reasonable size house, outfit it for even adding a couple of functions, surveillance and automation, things like that, probably for under $1,000. So that's our goal. Is it's nice to have this accessible technology, but if it's not affordable, what's the point?
Yeah.
So we actually put a lot of energy into and did a lot of work with our supply partners. There's a lot of partnerships that work there about how we got the cost down to something that it's accessible to everyone.
Now, my wife and I are thinking of putting in a security system in our house, and the easy thing is just call up a security company and have them come out and set it
Sure.
up. Are you working on that channel to get these into, you know, the Sonatrolls and the other kinds of you know, home protection
Yeah.
services?
Well, that's an interesting.
Because setting one of these up myself, I can tell it's a Saturday afternoon and $1,000, and I just rather call somebody and have them bring it out.
Right, but you know, the different set of needs. If
Yeah.
really what I'm setting up is a security system, and what I'm most interested in is that service, that may be really the right approach. I mean, we are talking to companies now that are in that segment where, of course, now they want their security system to be more sophisticated because, you know, you as a consumer want to view cameras remotely, but their little security system didn't do that. So we have a nice remotely manageable system that is interesting for those customers. So we are in that dialogue about that. Of course, what they're most interested in is the recurring, you know, revenue piece. For a customer that is really not very excited about that recurring revenue piece, we can give them at least some peace of mind by having a system at home that will keep track of home and then page you on or give you a text message on your cell phone and some images on your cell phone if something's happening.
Yeah.
So you avoid some of the service charges. But if you need that peace of mind of having that security service, yeah, you'll be using whatever it is they provide. And in some cases, it may be, you know, threshold technology that's coming to there that lets you do more than just get a phone call from somebody. You know?
Yeah. And using this system, you can do a lot of different things than just security, right? I could put a camera at the front door, and if I'm upstairs and I don't want to have to walk down to see who's ringing the doorbell, I can have a camera take images as soon as somebody walks in and have it show up on my computer
Correct.
screen, right?
Or send it to your mobile-enabled text, you know, cell phone. So you know,
Yeah.
there's or I should say, a multimedia-enabled cell phone. And we also do energy management, which is becoming sort of hitting a fevered pitch right now. Everybody talks about green, you know, everybody in the, say everybody, but most companies and a lot of press is out there trying to focus on, you know, how do we make things, you know, more energy efficient. Yeah. And for the home, there's two things that come into that. One is being smarter about controlling where you use power. We talked about like the turning on the light. You know, I live in an end of a cul-de-sac that's dark, and I don't really want to leave the light on all the time, but I want some easy, simple way to turn that light off and on. So therefore, I'm using the minimum amount of energy. Another piece of it is energy monitoring. We have the ability to, in devices that we use to measure power, or to control power, we also can measure it. And what that means is like if you have a set of lights that is controlled by one of our devices, I can also tell you how much energy that device has used.
And that's useful because a lot of appliances use electricity even when they're off, right? My stereo is still pulling some power even when it's off. And if I had a device like this, I could, one, turn it off and have it turn on when I enter the house or whatever, or if there's movement in the house. And two, I would be able to tell how much energy that thing is actually using, so I could be smarter about it.
And you can even, you know, there are devices certainly today that you can plug into an outlet, plug a device into it, you can go up to the LCD and read the power. Those are useful tools, but really you want a long-term and low-cost way of getting an energy profile. So we're working with the Smart Metering Initiative to basically read your meter and then give you a profile of where it went in the home.
I know in my house, electricity is pretty cheap. So it's a small part of my power bill. The real big part of the power bill is the heating. And with my thermostat right now, I have to leave it on all day long. Otherwise, I get home and I'm freezing, right? I freeze for the first hour until the house heats up. Is there a way for me to change that thermostat and put in a computer-controlled one where I could dial it with my phone, or you know, when I'm at work, I can call into the internet and say, hey, turn on my heater, so that I don't have to leave it running for 8 hours. I only have to run it for an hour before I get home, and then I get home and it's very comfortable.
Right.
Is there something I could do around that?
Yeah, we actually will be coming out with a thermostat this summer that does precisely that and allows you not only to set up programming, which is, of course, people can buy programmable thermostats today, but like you said, have remote access, remote override to that thermostat so it can adjust. And even do things like, let's say you have a second home, and I don't know really when I'm going to use it. I don't want to try to program it, and I could call it, but even then, maybe I don't have phone service there. I don't know, whatever the scenario is. You could set it up to where when somebody came in the front door, then it starts, cranking the heat up if you're really wanting it warmer beforehand, of course, calling. But you also do this through things like hot water heaters and other kind of energy consumers that you may want in standby for a long time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I only have one house, but since I'm traveling so often, oftentimes I don't know when I'm going to come home because, airplanes are pretty unreliable unless you have your own airplane at this point. But, sometimes you come in 6 hours late because the airplane was late, or you missed a flight or something like that, or you stayed another day. And why have a program running for a day just because you decided to stay skiing or something like that, right? It'd be really nice to be able to, on the way home from the airport, say, hey, turn everything on and have it all ready when I get home. And that way, at least the house is warm, and that sure would help my energy bill.
And for a lot of people, they're seeing some value. They understand connectivity. I think of friends of mine that didn't understand the networking, but now they understand networking and the sort of virtual connectivity. But the real problem is you can do some of the things you're describing today, but you have to be a technophile. Go to the store, buy a PC, download one of these, or buy one of these programs that do this sort of stuff. And it's a pretty erector set kind of project. So for us, it's like, how do we do that in the concept of like the boombox, talking about the stereo side of it, where here's a single thing that I can implement. So yeah, and as people get doing more of these things, like anything, we'll see applications that, you and I are talking about that we never even dreamed of, In 4 or 5 years now, people will be asking you to do stuff that you never even thought about.
So why can we do this today that we couldn't do it 2 or 3 years ago? What's happening in this industry? Is it the cost of the devices is coming down? Is it the networking protocols that have come out that allow home automation? Tell me a little bit about
Yeah, in general, you're absolutely like anything, the cost is coming down. There's also consumer awareness, just the idea that these functions, we talk about somebody looking at a camera of their home remotely. That seemed like a pretty far-fetched idea 5 years ago. If you really think back about things people were talking about, now it's not far-fetched at all. I can go to the store and buy a camera, and I can subscribe to a service where I can remotely view that camera. So the consumers are just becoming more, I think, inundated with that, and they're seeing the television shows where they're seeing this sort of stuff. But again, it tends to be kind of higher end, has to have a guy attached to hook it up. And so we think the next really big hurdle is not only getting the cost down and getting just the technical functionality there, but getting it to accessible price points and accessible ease of setup.
Yeah, you're still let's turn it on. You're still a little geeky though, right? You still need a computer to really make this thing sing, and you have an Ethernet cable, right? So you plug that into your cable modem or your Ethernet switch so that it can talk to the internet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the place that you did bring this home and plug it into your cable modem. And as far as a laptop or a PC, that we assumed that for most of our customers, they at least knew how to open a browser. That was sort of our low level. What's the lowest common denominator is that our customer can at least open a browser and type in something, a URL or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's it. But beyond that, the promise we make to consumers is that regardless of how sophisticated a system you want to set up, you'll never touch a CD-ROM, you'll never have to load a driver, you'll never type an IT term, period. I don't care how complex a system it is.
Really?
From the time you take it out of the box to the time that you're doing some of the functions we just talked about. And that's, it took a lot of work to get there, but that's what we believe we needed to achieve in order for this to be truly, mass market, go to Sears or Kmart and see this kind of technology.
On the table behind you have a bunch of tell me a little bit about some of the components. You don't have to show them every single one to me, but show me some of the common ones that I might get.
We have a variety of peripherals. This is a motion detector, pretty classic kind of motion detector. It's wireless, battery powered, runs on 3 AAA batteries or alternately on a little wall adapter. This will cover about 30 or 40 foot range inside a home or a garage or a backyard. And it's wireless. The wireless range is in the several hundred foot range. I live on some acreage, and I can cover the entire property with the wireless. That was really important to us too. Is you want to keep a lot of products you might find that are starting to get into wireless. are companies that didn't understand the implementation very well, and you'll find the wireless connectivity kind of worked fine across the living room, but you wanted to move something out to the detached garage, it didn't work. So one of the advantages of looking at a company like Threshold from a systems point of view is we've looked at it as a system. We've thought about it as a system. So each component is thought of as a component of that system.
Do animals set this off, or does it have to be somebody 6 feet tall running around?
Well, that's always a hard choice, because actually when you see the motion detectors that'll advertise, say, like a pet alleyway or something like that, basically they're saying they're reducing the sensitivity, lower. Yeah. You can actually achieve the same thing by mounting it higher or actually changing the angle slightly. But we tried to pick something that we thought was pretty nominal for most people. The success rate of saying I want to have a motion system and we'll never ever see the pet in the house, I mean, it doesn't work, because you have the cat that jumps up on the couch, or there'll be some scenario typically where that happens, unless it's goldfish we're talking about.
Right. So this shouldn't call the fire department or call the police department, right? Yeah.
Well, again, it depends on your usage. I mean, if you're having it in the garages and places that at certain times there should be no movement in there, then you can use it to call, make a call to you or to emergency services. Okay. Another peripheral. This is what we call our power control module. Plugs into an outlet, then you plug a device into it. We can take control of any device now plugged in here in terms of turning it off and on. And as we mentioned before, this will handle about 2,000 watts of power. It'll also measure the energy within about 1% accuracy that's traveling through here. And with that information, you come back and you can look and say, what's the profile? Let's say it's plugged into my refrigerator or whatever it is it's plugged into. And you can even do function, let's say, to try to make your kids more power aware, as you give them, say, a $30 allowance for their combination stereo, TV, game system, computer. Because you're in maybe a household where $150 electric bill is kind of a lot, and you try to let your children know that you can do this. Well, you plug their system into here, or with one of our outlets that you can put in the wall, and you can program it up that says after $30 of usage within a month, it turns off. And that way, you've kind of built in a sense of it's a finite resource for them. Yeah. So. A lot of different kinds of things can be done with the devices. There's like you have the basic functionality and basic connectivity. It's consumers' imagination in terms of how they put it to use.
Does this show me a chart of when the power comes on?
Right.
Over time.
In our user interface here, you can call up and look at any device in the system. So like power control modules that we were just talking about, I can take a look at.
Yeah, you see it right here.
Give you an example like
around 9 p.m. it starts being
entertainment
used.
System, or shows you when it's being used in the power, and you can take a look at it over a week, a month. Like in this case, they're using it once per day as the high usage, and then there's a little bit of low level usage that you're talking about in the standby power. And that's where a lot of people may have some real surprises where saying, geez, I didn't even touch the thing this afternoon and it was drawing 180 watts of power, because certain devices don't do that very well. Although there's a lot of scrutiny and we expect it to be better, but this way you can know precisely.
Interesting.
And then
so how does this talks wirelessly with your computer? So this can be upstairs or in the office, and this box is in the office, and it all talks wirelessly. I don't have to tear into a wall and put a cable or anything like that?
No, everything we do is wireless.
And does this work even in a big house? If somebody has a 8,000, 10,000 square foot house and it might have a lot of distance from end to end, does it work even in that?
Yeah, we've measured it. Well, we've never actually found a residential structure that we couldn't work in. I'm sure there are some mansions out there we don't have access to. Bill Gates' mansion.
The Vatican.
I'm sure there's some residents out there built with stone and steel that just make wireless communication, difficult. But we've never found a residential structure that we couldn't not only cover the residents, but get out into the yard and cover detached driveways and that sort of stuff. Like I said, I live on a little over 20 acres, and I can cover that entire property, with this stuff. And that was a passion of ours when we started the company. Is if this is supposed to be easy, simple, it also means that you shouldn't have many caveats to its usage, saying, "Oh yeah, it works, but only at 65 feet." You know, it's like no, let's make it work, because the incremental cost is really not that high, and for the most part, as a consumer, you're purchasing Threshold because we've become your system supplier. You're saying, "Hey, I just like what these guys do, and I'm going to let my home automation, smart home, be a Threshold system because they've thought through this." So, you know, in that sense, we'll end up adding a nickel here or a dime there to make something a little better.
Now, what's because I've seen other companies that are trying to do the same thing, get home automation and security under $1,000 using a wireless system. What separates you from those other guys? What makes you different?
For the most part, ease. You know, I think functionality, we can point that we can get you doing more sophisticated things in a shorter period of time and with a very short learning curve. So, you know, we see this sometimes where some of the other emerging companies will get pointed to and say, "Hey, what about those guys?" And I can show you a couple examples that have happened where those companies have now retracted themselves from a consumer marketplace because they realized just consumers weren't ready to handle an instruction manual that starts out with plugging it in and saying, "Tell me your IP address," you know, or your PPOE, you know, and it's just, or you know, put your encryption key into here. And one of the examples we use is a wireless camera, and they're all pretty much the same. I mean, they're getting better, but you know, here's a quick start guide. It's the only documentation that comes with a typical wireless camera.
Yeah,
you know, it has LKLM N number of steps. So you know that's ludicrous. It should have 1 or 2 steps if it's truly Joe and Jane, you know, 6-pack consumer kind of product.
Hey, I'm a geek. I still don't want to deal with the steps, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. You know, there are things as a technophile that you want to play with, and there are things that you don't want to play with. You know, and same thing if you can afford the person to come out and hook it up, more power to you. But there may be cases where there's a lot of, like my brother. Has been a little frustrated that, you know, he brought somebody in, had a fairly high-end system brought into his new home, but he has to pay somebody, you know, a few $100s to come out and make an addition or a change to it, and then schedule the appointment. And so again, when you're back to something that you can master the technology on your own, there's lots of flexibilities that come to it. You know.
How did you get into this business? Why did you start this business?
That's a really good. I was involved with wireless and involved with home routers and firewalls, things like that for a long time. Very passionate about the market. I was with Nokia, a general manager there, doing similar kinds of wireless router products, but always passionate about how do you solve the ease of use problems. And where it really drove it home is I had left Nokia and spent a couple of years on a road trip. I bought a car on the East Coast and spent 2 years and 60,000 miles driving it to California. I know, not a very direct route. Going to see old friends and family haven't seen for a long time, and every time you went to visit somebody, they'd say, "Well, you know," if they know you're technical, you know, it's like, "I can't get my printer, you know, to talk to this." I mean, you get this all the time,
Oh,
sure. So, you know, it's like the old days, a doctor. If you were a doctor, everybody asked you for medical advice. Now, you know, if you've got a technical background or associated with a technology business, everybody wants to know. You get you to help them with something, and you come back off of this trip, and it's just, you know, you realize that, and you look at the growth of businesses like the Geek Squad. I mean, here's a business that's built on the premise that stuff is hard and people need help, and they're willing to pay for it. Okay, that means there's probably more business that can still be made by getting into that, or let's create the technology that makes some of those problems go away. So, and that's really became the genesis for the company. Came off of that sabbatical kind of trip and said, there's a market out there, there's a desire.
And how are you funded? Are you self-funded, or?
It's been friends and family. Most of it's Sonoma County based, or certainly Bay Area based in terms of, but we haven't done any institutional capital. I mean, one thing's with consumer businesses, you know, that it's a little bit more uncomfortable for the institutional guys until you get to the point of shipping and some volumes, and you know, there's a revenue. The whole ecosystem's more established.
Well, it's really tough to get on the shelf at Fry's or Best Buy or whatnot. You almost have to buy the shelf space, don't you? And that's real expensive, especially considering how many stores Best Buy has, and if you have to pay $5,000 to get on a shelf at each store, it starts adding up because they have a lot of stores.
Yeah. Well, we've actually been in dialogue with some of these guys for a while. you know, we're solving a problem they have too.
Yes.
You're talking about, you know, the wireless camera I was just showing you. You know, they're seeing return ratios even today around 30%. That's an insane number for any channel to deal with. They want single-digit numbers. Actually, they prefer for it to be zero.
Yep.
And a company that can come in and say, listen, I can make that 30% return ratio for the customers that are coming in and buying this functions, you know, this application, and I can make that go down to 4% or 6%. You know, we've got their attention. So again, I can make more money for that retailer per foot of shelf space because my product will have much lower return ratio. And because we do so many things, and I think we'll eventually be pretty enticing for the consumer to continue to add functionality, that we generate more return traffic for them as well. So the enthusiasm's actually been pretty high on the part of the channel, because we're not selling just yet another, you know, wireless access point. We're selling a whole new system.
And to end up, let's get a little geeky. Are there APIs? Can I take that image off that camera and do something with it as a programmer? So could I build a new kind of home entertainment system or a security system that isn't really possible with a closed approach?
Well, there are some things that will be open to the gadgeteers, if you want to think of it in that sense, where a lot of our wireless for our peripherals use a standard called OneNet. OneNet's an open standard. You can put it together with a number of different parts from different places. So you could buy, you know, a OneNet development kit or a little board, which, you know, say $49, and then build some special kind of gate controller or dog controller kind of function. And with that, be able to implement something unique to you, you know. And we've looked at other things like Tickle interfaces. This is a Linux-based box and things like that to allow that kind of, you know, of course you get into that, how much you start making the system flexible from that gadgeteer point of view, when you start letting problems creep in. But we certainly, we have a lot of gadgeteers here at Threshold, so we'll certainly always keep that close to our heart to do that.
Now what's Blue Spot?
Blue Spot is our...
Other than the little blue spot on all these devices.
Yeah, that's right. And what you see here is all of our devices have an auto configuration port. And one of the things that we've solved for the consumer is, let's say you want to add a camera, or you want to add a device to control another appliance around the house. It's wireless, and one of the things about wireless is you need it encrypted. And today, if you look at like these high-end homes that you were mentioning earlier that people paid, very few of them are actually set up encrypted. I could probably, with a few $100s of equipment attached to my laptop, take control of your home. For the most people, there's not an incentive for crooks to do it, because what's the point of turning on your lights and stuff like that? But if it starts getting into security and surveillance and, you know, stuff like that, then suddenly wireless encryption becomes very important. And while encryption is starting to be kind of resolved in the Wi-Fi world, in the automation control world, they're far from it. And in fact, most solutions, most technology shipping today don't have encryption running.
And encryption, I know a little bit about encryption. That box needs to know the key, that this is speaking a common language, so that it can decrypt what this thing's sending over to
And
it.
we're getting used to it in like with the Wi-Fi world, because we understand there's an SSID and a WEP key, or, you know, at least some percentage of the consumer base beginning to understand that. And I've got a user interface there. But when you get to devices like this is where the struggle gets to be. You know, I don't have a user interface, so how do I interact with the consumer?
So how do you?
In our system, you come in and you just say, setup, add device. We ask if it's a Blue Spot device. That's our configuration technology. You say yes. You hold the device next, asking to hold the device next to each other, and it goes through and programs. So what's happening is this device is telling the controller I'm a power control module, and then meanwhile the controller is now loaded back into here, encryption keys and frequencies, SSID, all that stuff. And you notice this didn't have to be plugged in. It's a passive interface.
And it knew that was a power module. It says it right there on the screen.
Yeah, it says it's a power module, and here I have an option to go edit the name. It gave it power control 1 was the name, or I can do it later.
So I could change it to family room or something like
whatever
that.
Whatever you want to name it to. And then give you an example. Here's a camera. This is a color, infrared, audio, video camera, so it's both audio and video. I want to add this to the network. Same thing, that asks for me to hold the two spots next to each other. So we do that. And again, it's telling it on a camera, but different is where this device was a 1-net device, the camera is an 802.11 device. And see where it's going to says a camera 1, and again, I can change it to
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, Wi-Fi. And then there's other wireless technologies coming out like Zigbee. There's some proprietary systems that have been out there for a while. We want to connect and play well with all the technologies, but for most consumers we deal with, they don't know a megabit from a megahertz from a megapixel and don't want to know.
Okay.
You know? So this is technology where, with our configuration technology, regardless of what the underlying networking is, it all looks the same. You know, they all work the same. They all hook up the same. It's just
that's killer. So you shielded me from all those technology underlying pipes.
There's one step in order to bring something home and make it a part of your encrypted network, and that is hold it next to here for a few seconds. That's the only step involved.
We should have started with that. Well, thank you so much. This is really cool. I want a few of these to put in my house because I have a whole bunch of things I want to do. So, thank you so much for giving me a little tour around Threshold.
Yeah, thank you.